I know another issue that you're passionate about and kind of delves into what we're talking about is human trafficking. Can you kind of talk about, I know in the past you've gotten some budget funding for human
Yeah.
trafficking, kind of what you're working on this year and kind of, I guess how has human trafficking occurred, during the pandemic and, has there been an increase in human trafficking that you've seen?
Yeah. I don't know how else to say it, but I can't, probably one of the most horrific crimes that could exist to any human being, to steal them um, and use them to create profit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's plain and simple language. People are stolen, they're beaten, abused, held against their will, drugged, oftentimes for work, um, but most of the time for sex. Um, Children, boys, girls, grown adults, and it happens all across America, and here particularly in California, and particularly in the areas that I represent or dense urban areas,
Hmm.
uh, from the poorest neighborhoods to the richest neighborhoods. And what we're asking for is an additional 10 million. So there is a 10 million currently in the budget, and those are to help those who are trying to escape. And that means rental assistance, food assistance. It could include legal advice. And there are organizations up and down the state who do this. Now, this is a budget, the 10 million that was already included, and we fought hard to get that there. But what we're now asking because of the pandemic is an additional 10 million, because if people had to shelter at home, could you imagine what happened to folks who are human trafficked and had to shelter with their abusers and those who held them against their will?
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that's what we're really facing. So we have more of a desperate need uh, to help them escape the conditions that they're in. There are young mothers who are held captive with their kids. I mean, it's plain and simple. We see this all the time. There are folks who have no escape from the torment they face, and even under COVID. Um, so that's what we're asking for, an additional 10 million. So when you really look at it, our budget typically goes well over 230 billion in recent
Yeah.
history.
Wow.
It's just budget dust. We're
Right.
asking for budget
20
dust
million.
for one of the most horrific humanitarian crimes that could ever exist on planet Earth.
Right. I know, this has been talked about and it just seems like such an unfathomable crime that this is allowed to occur.
Well, it's
Um,
not allowed,
right.
but it occurs.
Exactly.
It occurs. People are stolen from across the world. People are stolen in their own cities, driven from one side of the country to the other. And I use a strong word like stolen, but let's not sugarcoat what it is.
Mhm.
When somebody is taken against their own will or misled to believe that they were doing something else and then held against their own will to do something, let's be very clear about what that is. You are taking a human being and you're forcing them to do things that are unimaginable to the mind,
Right.
simply because someone wants to make a profit.
No, no, it's totally outrageous. I guess within the 10 million that you've gotten the past few years, kind of what are some of the positives that's come out of that and kind of what do you expect with an additional 10 for the 20
Sure.
to hope to achieve?
But when somebody cries out for help and they want to leave that situation, we got to help with rental assistance.
Hmm.
We've got to help with putting their life back together. We've got to help with making sure that they have a safe place where they can't be found. Uh, Job skills, helping them to find a job, helping them to take care of those immediate needs that anybody needs when they're getting up off the floor, so to speak. Um, so what's key to this is making sure that we have the resources, and we know that COVID has made the situation much worse.
Right.
We don't know how bad it is, but we know that it has gotten a lot worse. So we want to make sure that we have the adequate resources so that when you call an organization that does this, and I work very closely with CAST, it's in Los Angeles. That when they call, that resource is there, that we can get them into an apartment, that we can get them into a hotel room, that we can get them fed, clothed, and the training necessary to be able to get out a job, that we have the wraparound support services,
Mhm.
that we have the mentoring, that we have the mental health care services or the therapies, whatever it is that that individual needs at that moment, and we want to meet them at that moment. We need to have the resources to do that,
Right.
and that's really what we're fighting for.
So much has been looked at, over the past few, years about incarcerations and crime and punishment. But this has obviously been an area that, could, I guess, use more in resources for local law enforcement. What's being done on the law enforcement side to help kind of eradicate human trafficking?
Well, the laws are already in the book. You can't do this to somebody,
Hmm.
and there's already efforts there to do it. One of the big challenges is if, and we faced this through legislative conversations years ago when I carried a bill to decrease the age, increase the age of those who could do testifying video camera closed circuit away from the courtroom. And this is really key because if you're a young person and you've now escaped this tragic situation,
Right.
we can't expect you, nor should we, to go into the court, face your accuser with all the trauma that it comes with. And what if the case doesn't hold? And that young person has nowhere to go
Right.
after that. So we've worked on that. Certainly, law enforcement works on that issue. And in fact, recently I had a conversation with the incoming AG, Mr. Banta, and we talked about this,
Right.
right? And he wants to get engaged, wants to work on this. And just for all the listeners here, we have a little running joke that I tell him all the time. We call him Bantamania. So if you happen to see him, AG Bantamania. But in all seriousness, I think it's an area that we need to create awareness so that folks understand what really does happen and the amount of resources and what we need to do, and to look for the signs too, right? Look for the signs of somebody who needs that help and to be able to give them the resources. And that's why I'm going to circle back into the dollars that we're requesting, because if we come across somebody uh, and we know that this is the case or that they are asking for help, we need to give them the ability to contact somebody, but we need to have the resources there when they call,
Right.
and this is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I guess could you delve into that a little more about kind of the groups you work with, kind of what they're working on, and if listeners out there, I guess, see something or know something, who
Sure.
who could they
Well,
contact to
I'm an
help?
LA guy, so I'm gonna plug in Cast,
Right.
but that's an organization that we work with, and you can easily Google it, Cast, and if you do come across somebody, and it's sometimes it's who you might expect or who you might not expect, just giving them that telephone number goes a long ways. Or if you suspect, maybe calling Cast and asking for the best practices as to how to talk to that individual, or maybe identify that individual. But
Mhm.
what's key to it is not ignoring it. Not ignoring it and creating awareness. It's not the kind of conversation most people have. It's not something that is on the front of the newspaper or in the news every single night,
Right.
but it's something that is devastating. And kind of like what we're doing right here. I mean, most people probably are new to the subject,
Mhm.
haven't dove into it as deeply. But when you listen to it, now you know. And now there is a responsibility. So lots of things people can do to it. Um, Mostly be aware, understand, don't tolerate it, and look up a nonprofit in the area who may be doing work on it. If somebody asks for help or you think that somebody is being held against their will, make that call. And that's key. Make that call.
Yeah. With the additional 10 million, what can these organizations expect to do to kind of increase their efforts here?
Well, most of it has to do with giving the services, and that's
Mhm.
what's key. And I know I keep going back to that, but
Right.
that's really is key. When somebody calls, we don't want to turn them away because there aren't the services. When somebody calls and says, "I need help," on the other side of that line should be, "What can we help you with immediately? I need a place to stay.
Mhm.
We need to figure out right away the fastest way to get them somewhere to stay." And typically, that might be uh, temporary housing in the way of a hotel. But we need to get them away from the situation they are at until we find a more permanent solution, like an apartment. But that's where we ultimately want them, is to help reconstruct their lives.
Right.
But we need to get them out of there. And that's why these dollars are incredibly important. And some of it is also trying to reconnect with family, but we're going to need the resources to reconnect with family, or we're going to need the resources for any sort of services that they might request or need immediately, basic food stuff. And these are all critical. I know I go back to the basics because really that is what it takes when somebody needs to walk away from that situation. There's counseling involved. There's rental assistance. There's a lot that needs to happen, with a lot of tender love and care, with somebody who's gone through a traumatic experience like this.
Right. Just simple basics, food, shelter,
That's what you want to start
clothing,
off
right?
with.
Yeah.
I mean, because the number one thing is, if somebody calls and says, "I need help and I need to get out of here this situation," the response should be, if we get these dollars, because the need has increased, is yes, and here's where we're going to put you up.
Right.
That's why it's so key. First thing is to get that person in a safe